Welcome to the Daily Dawg. Today is Friday, November 14th, and it is time to break down the big game between Georgia and Texas on Saturday night in Sanford Stadium. This will be the first time in history Texas has stepped foot between the hedges or come onto the field between the hedges. This will be the 8th all-time game between Georgia and Texas, which is not very many for two storied programs. They haven't played a lot in their history, but this will be the first time that Texas has ever come to Sanford Stadium. Georgia has played in Austin. The two teams have played in Dallas in the Cotton Bowl. They've played in the Sugar Bowl, and trying to think what else. They played in the SEC championship game in Atlanta, and way back in history, in the one of the early series, Georgia opted to play Texas in Atlanta, or the game was played in Atlanta. I don't remember all the detailed history of that, as opposed to playing in Texas. Georgia did actually, in some of its early days, play some of its bigger games in Atlanta. It was a little easier to get bigger exposure. Even a few games played at Grant Field, if you can believe it, when there was a big national brand like Texas. I'm not sure if that's actually the story of the game that was played in Atlanta or not. I should have looked that up. But in fact, I wish I had more history or stories to share. I usually, of course, I like getting into the stories and the history and the fun stuff. I wish I had any personal stories to share about Texas. But in my lifetime, and my time as a fan, big fan of Georgia football, Georgia and Texas have not played very much. The first game of my lifetime between Georgia and Texas would have been the Cotton Bowl at the end of the 1983 season. It was technically, I guess, the 1984 Cotton Bowl. It's always a little confusing when you have these January games. It's the 1984 Cotton Bowl because, of course, it's January 1st, but it was representing or capping off the end of the 1983 season. 1983 season would see Miami win the national championship, and as we've made fun of or poke fun or talk about, 1983 is also one of the many seasons that Auburn has recently decided to declare as a national champion. And it's true, some services, some of the people who did rankings of their own different types or whatever, some known, like Billingsley, I think is one of them, and Billingsley is a known entity that's been around the NCAA, college football, for a long time, and they declared through their ranking and rating system that Auburn was indeed number one in 1983. The story of that was Auburn did have a great team. They went, I think, 11-1 on the season, and they actually lost to Texas early in the season. They played Texas at home, lost by 13 points, 20-7. They would lose no other games, including they came to Athens and played an all-timer that they won 13-7 between the hedges. This is Auburn back in 1983. Where the two teams came in ranked number 3 and 4 in the country. But Miami had also had a big season. They were, I guess, 10-1 and they were 5th ranked. So here's where Auburn's gripe is. It comes down to the bowl games, and Miami had the opportunity to play Nebraska. Nebraska had been number 1 and undefeated much of the season. Texas had actually been undefeated and number 2 much of the season. And then you had Auburn had moved back up after its early season loss to Texas to number 3, and that's understandable. They were the first one-loss team, and they were behind Texas, who had beaten them and were undefeated. And then you had Georgia had gone 10-1-1 at that point in the season and had moved up to number 7. So at number 5, I think, was Miami, and I don't remember the rest of it. But long story short, you had some shakeup in the bowl game. Miami beat Nebraska in an all-timer classic of a game. Auburn won the Sugar Bowl, I think, against Michigan in a low-scoring game that set offensive football back for some time, and that was sort of Auburn's MO. If you looked around, most of their games were like the game against Georgia in Athens that season, 13-7, and I think they won 9-7 against Michigan in the Sugar Bowl. And Georgia would go play Texas in the Cotton Bowl, and Georgia would win that game 10-9 to record our program's first ever win against Texas. We had played Texas a few times, but had never won a game until the 1980s, 1984 Cotton Bowl, ending the 1983 season. So, but of course, we had a very high ranking. We were 10-1-1. We were 7th coming into that game. Texas was number 2 in that Cotton Bowl, so it was a big deal to come in there and upset them and beat them. It was one of the big moments of the 1980s. A lot of longtime Georgia fans celebrate that moment. And again, this is a little before my time. I was certainly around, and like I've told you before, I'm a young fan growing up in Metro Atlanta, becoming a sports fan. I was aware of the Bulldogs' success. Obviously, they'd won the 1980 national championship, and they had really great seasons in 81, 82, and 83. And so this was one of those seasons. Unfortunately, they did lose to Auburn. They had a tie somewhere else in the season, which I don't remember who that was. So you get to the bowl game, the Cotton Bowl, and Georgia is actually, I said 10-1-1. That's where they finished on the season. They were 9-1-1, I think, going to the bowl game and ranked 7th. And Texas was undefeated in 11-0. Had Texas won that game, it's possible that Miami, would not have been, and probably would not have jumped from number 5 all the way up to number 1, and that would be Miami's first of 5 national championships. So that's kind of some interesting history. Miami would go on to win 3 national championships in the 80s and 2 more in the 90s, and win 5 in a relatively short span of time, 10 or not 10 years, but maybe 15 years or so. I'd have to look that up. But Miami would just bang out national championships and become a dominant program during that time. And this was their first national championship. So Georgia helped facilitate that Miami national championship by beating undefeated Texas, who probably, now again, Texas would have had a hard time jumping up because they were number 2. And so if Miami doesn't beat Nebraska, then, that wouldn't open the door. But again, with Miami down at number 5, Auburn in there at number 3, Texas in there at number 2. There's, I guess, it's just hard to say for sure what the voters would have done, but I guess there's a strong chance that if Texas beats Georgia in the Cotton Bowl, and Miami still ekes out that 1-point epic win against Nebraska, that Texas could have jumped up to number 2. I guess there's also a chance that Auburn could have, but that seems to make very little sense. And here's the rub, and going back to poking fun at Auburn, certainly some people said, hey, if you look at the strength of schedules and rankings, and there were some of those, again, kind of ranking and services and things out there that did declare Auburn should have been declared national champion in 1983 based on power, but the way, power and strength of schedule and that kind of stuff. But based on the way the schedule flowed, the way the polls, the AP and the coaches poll went throughout that season, what really happened was that Auburn was really never in that contention, and Texas was always ahead of them and undefeated and had beaten them at home. So it's hard to imagine that most of the voters and most of the people who watched college football would have had any reason to jump Auburn over Texas, who would have been undefeated had they not lost to Georgia, and put Auburn in as national champion over an undefeated team that had beaten Auburn. So, yes, there are some entities out there that said, hey, when you look at the record and the strength and who they played, and sure, again, Auburn had the argument that us Georgia fans and SEC fans are always going to make is, hey, we were a once defeated SEC team, right? So beat Michigan in the Sugar Bowl. They had a lot going for them. I'm not saying they didn't have a great season. They did. They beat Georgia. Again, that was a 3-4 matchup in Sanford Stadium. So I think they certainly had a strong argument on strength of schedule. And Texas, one of the reasons they were not number 1 and Nebraska was they were not in the same conference back then. Texas was in the Southwest Conference, and Texas racked up a lot of wins in its history playing in the Southwest Conference. They had like 30-something Southwest Conference championships. But it was well known in that time that the Southwest Conference was not much of a challenge, right? I mean, I'd have to go back and look at exactly who was in that. In fact, wait a minute, I have that queued up somewhere because I was looking at it earlier. Let me just see if I can find that real quick so we could talk about it, because it is interesting to go back and look at that and say, hey, wait a minute, what was going on during that time frame? Let me just see if I can find it, but I said I had it queued up, but maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't leave it queued up. Hold on, give me 1 second. I think I clicked on this. I know where to go. Okay. So yes, just while we're on the topic, this reminds me. So Auburn is claiming in this 1983 season, Billingsley, something called CFRA, and the New York Times actually declared Auburn should have been number 1 at the end of the 83 season. The Rothman and Sarragan polls also split their number one vote between Auburn and somebody else. I'm not sure. But okay, so the Southwest Conference in 1983 was Texas and SMU. Of course, you might remember SMU eventually got caught cheating with what today is now just part of football, paying your players and having deals like giving them cars and giving them, having them represent car dealerships and businesses around the state and the area and get money for that. Now that's commonplace. We call that on NIL. Schools can pay directly. But SMU got caught in an era when that was not commonplace and not allowed, and they received the harshest NCAA penalties anybody ever would. They had the death penalty. They literally had to shut down their program, and they had been a top-ranked and competitive program and often competing for that race for the Southwest Conference Championship and for National Championship. And in this 1983 season, they were ranked number 12 at the end of the season. They were 10-2, but they would get the death penalty and barely be heard from again until they reappeared in last year's playoff. So kudos to SMU for finally making it back from the 80s and the death penalty. And of course, when we say making it back, we always have the humor of Texas is back, baby. Is Texas back? I was going to say Texas is back in Athens, but then I realized Texas has never been to Athens before, so I can't make that joke. But anyway, the Southwest Conference in 1983 is Texas, SMU, Baylor, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Texas Tech, Houston, TCU, and Rice. So Arkansas had been, and there were some epic games between Texas and Arkansas in the 60s and 50s, and Arkansas is one of the, if you go back to the 60s especially, Arkansas is one of the great teams of that era, and they've had some national championship credentials, and they had some elite football credentials. But most of that glory time was in the 60s, and that's also the glory time for Texas, largely. So they had some big battles. But by the 80s, Arkansas is just an average team. SMU is challenging Texas a little bit more. And again, and then it's, you know a little bit about A&M since they've been in the conference. It's been widely talked about how A&M has last won a national championship in 1938, I think, is what keeps being said. So A&M's had some good seasons, but I think even this season right now, I think is something. It's not a high watermark in the sense that I don't think that they've never been ranked third before, but it's definitely. I think this is one of the few times, or one of the first times since maybe the 30s. I saw something about this the other day, that they've managed to get to this point in the season and be 9-0. So this is Texas A&M I'm talking about. So Texas A&M is in the Southwest Conference, and obviously A&M and Texas were big, bitter rivals, and Texas and Arkansas were rivals, and again, Baylor, SMU, Texas Tech, Houston. But most of these teams were not very good. So the Southwest point that I was getting to here is that the Southwest Conference in the 1980s is not very respected. It's basically just a vehicle for Texas to march through every year, beat everybody up, and win its conference, and then go out to its bowl game. And so while Texas is certainly respected as one of the blue bloods of college football, a lot of their time spent in the Southwest Conference when Arkansas was not good, being the other main team that was the big rival there, meant that Texas kind of just had a stage all to themselves to just kind of cakewalk through this conference. And so, the SEC of 1983 is much like the SEC of today. Okay, not as many teams. In 1983, your SEC lineup or your standings go like this. You had Auburn was number 3 in the country, and they won the SEC. Georgia came in second in the SEC, having lost to Auburn. They were number 4 in the country to finish the season. These are your final rankings for 1983. Florida finished that season 9-2-1, and they were number 6 in the country. Then you had Tennessee at 9-3, unranked. Not sure why that's the case. Maybe they were on some sort of a probation or something, because Alabama was 8-4 and finished the season ranked 15th. So you only typically played 6 conference games back then, just for some perspective. All the argument we've seen this season with the Big Ten and the SEC going back and forth about the 8-game and the 9-game schedule, you played 6 games back then. And if there was no direct head-to-head, the SEC would declare because again, look, you had you had Auburn. So you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, you had 10 teams. So the 10 teams were Auburn, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, Kentucky, Mississippi State, LSU, and Vanderbilt. And so you only played 6 conference games, so that means there's 4 teams in there you didn't play. So there's a decent chance that maybe 2 teams could even go 6-0 and not play each other at all. And so they would be in that era, they would be declared co-champions. And several of Georgia's 15 SEC championships in its history, and many of Alabama's 30 SEC championships in its history, are co-championship moments because of the way that happened. That was before the SEC championship game, which didn't come along until 1992, and when we accepted. That's when we brought. What was it? It was South Carolina and why do I struggle with that? I guess it was South Carolina and Arkansas would be the 2 teams that would come in to the conference then, in 1982. And that would take us to 12 teams. And then we would split into the East and West Division. And then later we would bring on Missouri and Texas A&M. And then, of course, our last expansion most recently, last season, was bringing in Texas and Oklahoma. So a lot of those teams from the western side of the southern United States coming in late into the conference. But the conference at this time, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, Kentucky, Mississippi State, LSU, Vanderbilt. And then you just look at that, and LSU is a team that can be a dominant team and a multi-time national champion. Ole Miss had glory days in the 1950s and claims national championship. Alabama, of course, is Alabama. Tennessee, their history. Florida, at this point in its program history, is often a team that could be good but had yet to claim a national championship or even an SEC championship. They go 9-2-1, 4-2 in the conference here in 1983, and they would win their first conference championship in the next season or two. So anyway, we didn't have, again, I don't have a ton of history on Texas or a lot of personal connection. Like I said, I vaguely remember hearing about this Cotton Bowl and how big a deal it was that Georgia goes to the Cotton Bowl, Texas's home bowl game, basically, because in this era, teams are largely committed to the bowl game that their conference typically goes to when they win the conference. And in 1983, Auburn wins the conference, so they go to the Sugar Bowl. And like I said, they played Michigan that year. Georgia, being an elite team, top 10, number 7 in the country at the end of the regular season, gets the invite to go to the Cotton Bowl, which was very unusual and have not played, especially back then, the Cotton Bowl a lot of times. But not being the SEC champion, but being a dominant or a top 10 elite team, we were invited to a pretty heady bowl game. The Cotton Bowl was a big deal back then. But Texas had regular tie-ins and was in the Cotton Bowl all the time. So this was like and it plays in Dallas. So this was like a home game for them. And so we go on the road almost into enemy territory here and knock them off 10-9, another low-scoring game, which seemed to be the style of the 1983 season amongst highly ranked teams, except for Miami, of course. And so it's a big deal. We knock them off, and we end up finishing the season 10-1-1 and number 4 in the country. And so you kind of continue this run. We're number 1 in 1980, and you have great teams again in 1981, 82, and 83. This wasn't really it was kind of a near miss. It wasn't really that close to being a championship team the year before, where we lost to Penn State in the Sugar Bowl. We beat Penn State in that game. We're probably national champion. And so we could have had, and this is where I love digging into the history, right? I mean, a lot of people will say, well, and they look at, I heard a guy on the radio today. I heard Kirby Smart's call-in show. I was in the car. So I heard a guy talking about, I think it was after the call-in show. So Kirby does the call-in show, which is no longer call-in that much. They talk to some people there in the audience. They have pre-written questions. They take questions from social media. They don't just have random call-in anymore, and which is probably good, because sometimes listening to these people call in, hey, your coach, listen, I'm down here in Buford, and we just love football and love the Dogs, and they go on and on. And look, I hate to rip on these guys. I'm not trying to make fun. I love all football fans, really, I do, and I love all Georgia fans. And I don't care if they're alum or they're just people who love Georgia football for whatever reason, and I don't care if they're rednecky. I don't care if they're good old Southern boys. I don't care if they're sophisticated, more elites, whatever. You're part of the Georgia. You claim Georgia fandom. Then come on in. The water's great, and welcome to Georgia, Bulldog Nation, right? But call-in shows. I used to listen to those when I was a kid, and callers come in and they just ramble and go on, and sometimes just make odd and funny points, and so, or no point at all. So, and I think that's what I was really getting at. Guys that call in and they're just like happy to talk to coach, and they make no point at all, and they just ramble on. It makes the show not so interesting. So I don't mind that they script the show a little bit more. They pick questions and they try to set stuff up for Kirby to answer, and they keep the Kirby's on between the commercial breaks when you listen to it, airing on WSB radio. In between commercial breaks, Kirby's probably on for a total of 30, 35 minutes or something like that in the quote unquote hour-long show. And then they switch to the Bulldog All-Stars, where they have guys talking about, the season and things Kirby said and whatnot. So anyway, I heard one of the guys, divergent, but I heard one of the guys calling in, and he was doing one of those, woo, yeah, I just love this, and going on and on about how, great everything was. And honestly, I diverted myself so much, let me admit, that I no longer remember the point I was making here. But I guess the idea is I was trying to get at was, I think it ties to the idea I was saying. Look, I remember hearing about I was saying, okay, here's what it was. As I was saying, look, even as a loosely connected fan, sort of a local kid in the area who was aware of Georgia but not a hardcore fan yet, back in the early 80s and during the national championship run in those seasons after, and going through this 1983 season, where we culminate this is sort of the cap of the run of this bowl game against Texas, sort of the cap of the great run of the early 80s. You had 1980, 81, 82, and 83 seasons, okay? And so this 83 season, the 82 season was a near miss. We could have, should have won a national championship. We were leading the Sugar Bowl against Penn State until Todd Blackledge uncorks a big-time pass near the end of the game, and they end up winning the game. I think it was 27-24 or something like that. I don't remember the score. But they win the game. They win the national championship in 1982. Georgia misses out. And that just would have added to the greatness of our program. Even though I wasn't following it that closely now, as a history fan, as a Georgia fan, a student of history, I look back at that and it's just sort of agonizing. Like it was basically very much equivalent if you were alive or a fan back then. And I've seen the footage and I've kind of read through it, and I've brought this sort of agony into my own life, even though I didn't really embrace it at that time. You're basically, it was like 2nd and 26 with Alabama. I mean, it was Blackledge uncorks, I think it's like a 40-yard touchdown pass near the end of the game, steals the victory, and we lose out on a national championship. So just imagine, as far as the program, where Georgia would sit in history if we're claiming 4 national championships right now. I think I've made this point before. I think we could or should be claiming 7. And because I think there are polls and legitimate things in the seasons that we could be. We only claim the 1942 season right now, where some of the polls, while we weren't the AP champion or maybe even the coaches champion at that time, we had a great team, and I think we were 11-1 that year, and several some entities did recognize us as national champion. That team got broken up because of the war. Georgia didn't field, I think, a football team one of the years that they had some junior varsity team guys play, but a lot of the guys who were a part of that team went off and they were involved in the war, and those who survived came back to Georgia, and they played again 1946, some of the same guys, and they led Georgia to an undefeated season in 1946, and that team gets no credit, but came in 3rd in the polls behind a couple other teams, I forget, Army and Ohio State maybe, or that were both declared, depending on who you looked at, champion. They nonetheless, it's you can make a strong argument for Georgia there, and there are some entities that look at that 1946 team, and I think we should claim that. There's some other teams in there, and we can do this in the off season, do this history. But so just I think it's fair though. Easily could have had that 1946, but we could have been the undisputed, untied, undefeated champion in 1982 if we'd won that Sugar Bowl. And it was taken away from us late. And I think just imagine sort of adding, we all know the frustration and the pain that we kind of lived through going from 1980 all the way to 2021 to claim a national championship. So not that 82 would have shortened it that much. It would have taken 2 years off of it, but it also just would have added a certain mystique because in many ways it took a while for Georgia to recognize. Vince Dooley was told about that there are entities in history that record Georgia as national champion in 1942. And he said, great. And when he was athletic director, he said, let's start claiming that, put a flag up. And he did. So kudos to Vince Dooley. He made the right choice there. I wish they'd told him about some of these other teams that could have been declared national champion. But so we had the 42 and then we had the 80, and then for as great a program as Georgia is in terms of all-time wins, bowl games, history, all the other things, SEC championships, we really lagged in the national championship. We just regularly could not seem to get to that point and get to that, get in that game and win it. Or here's that sort of that near miss moment, right? There was a lot of Georgia teams that had that near miss moment. Some of them didn't even make it to the Sugar Bowl, and some of them, in this case, they did. And so just would have been a bigger feather in the cap of the history of Georgia football to have had a championship, national championships in 1980 and 82. Okay. And then, so you have, it just would have put, that era was really an amazing and dominant era for those 3-4 seasons of Georgia football. And it just would have put a real cap on it to have had that. So anyway, this 1984 season, though, we weren't quite in there because we lost Auburn. We were undefeated till you got to the Auburn game. We had one tie. We're 8-0-1. We go to the Auburn game and we lose that game. Auburn remains ahead of us. They're ranked third. We're seventh going into the polls. Like I said, they end up finishing 11-1. We finished 10-1-1. And the reality is, again, the way I've described it here and the way the polls were stacked up ahead of us, Auburn's ahead of us. They beat us. Miami jumped over us. Or, well, they didn't jump over us. They were fifth coming in. They jumped all the way from fifth to number one. So again, we probably wouldn't have, even though we beat Texas, even if Auburn had lost. Nebraska, I think, stayed ranked ahead of us. I think they got slotted in at number 2. They had been undefeated all season. They lose to Miami. Miami jumps up to number 1. Nebraska stays at number 2. Auburn stays at number 3. Georgia comes in at 4. Texas ends up down at like 6 or 7 or something like that. I don't remember the final rankings, but you get the idea. This is a deep dive. I've gone deep into history, but I always like to have a little history. This is the podcast as we start talking about and breaking down the game, where I like to talk about who the other program is. What do we know about them? And just get us knowledgeable about what we're going into, not just this game and what they did last week and this year, but what's the history? What's the history of the coaches? What's the history of the teams? What's the history that we should know about? And for Georgia fans, probably the first big history for most modern Georgia fans, you got to be basically much older than, you got to be over 60 to remember anything about a Georgia game prior to that 1984 Cotton Bowl to end the 83 season, because Georgia and Texas just hadn't played that much. So again, the game before that would have been 1958. Okay. So, and that game, if I remember right, so Georgia loses the 1958 game. So here's a little bit of history I know about this one. You probably heard about this, and I've seen some clips of this and some discussion of this pop up on social media. So if you hadn't heard about this before this game, and you weren't steeped in the Georgia history, being the big history buff I am, I've heard about this before. So Fran Tarkington is one of the first great Georgia quarterbacks, right? A guy, as far as especially one who would go on to play in the pros and have an amazing career. Fran Tarkington goes on, plays for the Minnesota Vikings, throws for over 40,000 yards in the NFL, which at that time was beyond anybody, and he becomes, and it's kind of funny because he wasn't really a big throwing quarterback in his time at Georgia. He was more of a running quarterback. And Georgia, of course, college football in general, just they didn't throw the ball a ton in that era in the 50s and 60s. And but Fran Tarkenton goes to the NFL and he lights up the NFL, sets passing records, and becomes one of the great all-time pros in the history of pro football. And my time growing up around Georgia football certainly was one of the great legends of Georgia football. I mean, nowadays we see, of course, Herschel, and deservedly so, right? And we've grown. You get Buck Bellew, who was on the radio and a local personality here in Atlanta sports, and of course he was a baseball guy as well. But so he talks about baseball. He talks about all kinds of stuff. Buck Bellew is a great personality, but for a long time, Buck Bellew was our only living national champion quarterback, right? And so these are the guys that, as I grew up as a fan, got to hear about. Like I'd see Fran Tarkenton on TV. Fran Tarkenton. It's funny. I was recently reminded, and this will take you back. Some of you are old enough to remember. I grew up as a kid watching a show. I was a big fan of a show called That's Incredible, and they just did these human interest stories, and it'd be like a lot of times they would end up. They had a live studio audience. They'd play the videos. They had. I think Kathy Lee or something. No, it wasn't Kathy Lee. I don't remember. It was a woman and two guys, and one of the guys in the studio was Fran Tarkenton. And so they had these three commentator announcers, and they would play these videos and talk about them and introduce them, and then the videos would go on, and they would tell you all these amazing stories or interesting stories or weird feats, sometimes stunts. I remember watching a guy jump over a moving car for the first time. They had like a Ferrari come flying under him at like 60, 80, 100 miles an hour, and he's like a ninja kind of guy, and he like times it so he jumps up in the air, and the car's going so fast. And of course Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all are low to the ground, so that helps, right? So he jumps up in the air and just holds himself in the air long enough for the car to zip underneath him. And I think that guy actually made it on That's Incredible twice when I was a kid, because he did that the first time, and then they were like, they came back and they were like, hey, he decided to up the ante, just one car is not enough. So they had two cars pass underneath him when he jumps by. And probably what was more amazing about that stunt was not so much the guy jumping in the air and while two cars pass underneath him, but for that to work, those two cars had to rip underneath him, basically driving almost bumper to bumper without crashing into each other. So they were as close together as possible when they zipped by underneath him. But so they would show that, and they stump, and then they would always end those segments like in a freeze frame, right? Like, is how the video would end if you're watching. Sorry, if you're watching on the podcast, I just froze myself, the video podcast. So, of course, there's audio and video. And let me just remind you guys, let me take this moment. I know a bunch of you do listen on audio. I have been doing it. It took me a long time to get it going up and properly, but we are doing the video podcast. And so the video podcast is available. You can see it on Substack. You can see it on YouTube. And I'm not sure where else video podcasts are available. Obviously, the audio podcasts come through on Spotify and Apple, and really just about most of the places you want to find podcasts. Or you can go directly to thedailydawg.com, which is hosted at Substack. And you can either choose to either listen to the audio or watch the video from there. And I hope you do. I'd love for you guys to come to Substack once in a while because you can make comments directly on there, and I will respond to those comments. I'll talk about them. We get some good comments, questions, just commentary, ideas. I will bring them up on the podcast and talk about them. So please take the time. If you want, you can email me. You can find every post on Substack. Every one of these podcasts has a place where you can click a button on the bottom that says leave a comment, send a message directly to me. So you can leave a comment right there on the page for everybody to see. You can send a message directly to me. You can share these posts with other people from there. So there's a lot you can do there. So I hope you go there once in a while, no matter where you get your podcast, whether it's YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Do come, and I hope you enjoy these videos. It took a long while technically to make these videos, but this seems to be, I think it's a little funny watching myself try to talk to you. I hope you find it personable, and I know this is the way that these have been going, audio podcasts around a while, but people seem to like the video. So I am working more and more. The last video I did have some of the stats and graphics on screen, and I will continue to try to add as much on-screen content as I can, like when I was last describing the college football basketball playoff, what I would do with the rankings, what the rankings were, and what my projected take on the rankings were. And I'm going to do a separate show. I'm going to try and since the game is 7:30, I will try to have a Saturday show, and I'll try to get that out. Each of the last couple Saturdays, I've run into some technical snafus where I had the whole thing recorded and ready to go about 7-8 a.m. so you could have all morning and day. But for some reason, I could not get the thing posted last Saturday until it didn't go out till like about an hour before the game. So I'm shocked as many of you listened to it as you did. There was decent stats on that actually. But anyway, that's just a little bit of housekeeping about the podcast. And please come to any place you can to you can do commentary, by the way. I do post, usually I post the videos on Facebook as well. I usually post some reels on Facebook and Instagram. You can certainly make comments there too as well, and I'll try to share those. I've had some likes and a few things like that. Not much for me to share, but if you actually post some sort of a comment or question, I will bring it up in one of the future podcasts. So you can find us there. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. You can find some of the reels that come out on there. I do put the shorts out on YouTube as well. For the video part, you can find the video part on YouTube. You can do audio on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all these things. So again, there's a little bit of the housekeeping there. But anyway, so back to all of that. I stopped for a second because I was like doing the freeze frame. So again, you're watching the video. I'm like, because that's how they did everything in the 80s. They freeze. So they would, in this show, That's Incredible, they would show these videos, and the one I was just talking about was the one where the Asian fella, he's some sort of a ninja type guy, and he gets on the show and he jumps over moving cars like Ferraris or Lamborghinis that are low slung to the ground. They brought him on once and he jumps over one car. They bring him back later because he jumps over two cars. I do actually remember one of the times that he did it. He actually his one of his feet dangled. He did this. He was barefoot when he did this. It's kind of his whole ninja thing. And one of his heel actually hit the windshield of one of the cars and cracked it. But I guess he was okay. So, which seems kind of amazing. I mean, a car whacks your foot at like 80 miles an hour, but and enough to crack the windshield, but I guess his foot was okay. Anyway, I just remember, and then the whole thing when they get to the end of that is that they would go back to the studio and they would show that they were showing the video there in the studio with the live studio audience that they recorded it in front of, and then they would always stamp the words on the screen, turn sideways like this, because this is how you did it in the 80s. You turned it at an angle, and they would freeze the frame and they go, "That's incredible!" And the whole audience would chant it. So, long-winded story. Why did that even come up? Because Fran Tarkenton was on that show. So, and Fran Tarkenton was the former Georgia football hero, and who went on to be an NFL legend and Hall of Famer, and football commentator. I used to hear him when growing up. He was talking on the TV shows about pro football and some college football, but when I was a kid, mostly about pro football. And so that's what I knew of Fran Tarkenton. He was on That's Incredible. He was a Georgia legend. He was an NFL legend, and he was on TV doing football commentary. So why does Fran Tarkenton matter in this context? Because Fran Tarkenton famously was a young freshman riding, I think just a freshman, and freshmen really didn't play very much back in those days, if at all. Georgia actually used to have a freshman team. The Georgia Tech game used to feature like a Thanksgiving weekend. I feel like the upcoming Friday Georgia Tech game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium is kind of like a throwback to the old Thanksgiving special that used to be the junior varsity, the freshman teams for Georgia Tech played each other as part of a fundraiser for children's health care, what we now think of as children's health care. There used to be Hugh Spalding, a couple different children's hospital anyway that got fused together into children's health care. They've now moved that fundraiser to the baseball game, which takes place at Truist Field between Georgia and Georgia Tech, or at least one of them. Sometimes they typically play the baseball series 3 games during the season. And the third one, play one at each, home and away. And then the third one is played at Truist Field, and that's a fundraiser for children's healthcare. So because obviously we don't have freshman teams anymore, because freshmen are no longer banned from playing, which they were at one point. And then even when they were not banned, people just didn't do it much. And so you had these JV teams and these freshman teams, so these guys could get some playing experience because they'd come out of high school and then just stand around on the sideline, right? But so I don't remember for sure if Fran Tarkenton was a freshman or just a sophomore. He had not played, but he basically, the story is that Georgia was getting their butt kicked by Texas. They were playing Texas in Austin in 1958, and 58. And Fran Tarkenton had, not really played much at this point, but he basically just slipped into the game. Like he just kind of was standing there and coach put me in, and there was a change of possessions, or somebody had to come in and go out. And I think, the story is he basically just put his helmet on and ran onto the field. Coach was like, what's he doing in the game? And he actually helped generate some offense. Now, Georgia would still lose this game 13-8, but Georgia couldn't even get out of its own goal line until Fran Tarkenton got in the game and got a couple first downs and started making something happen. So these are some stories that are sort of tangentially, that's actually directly a Georgia-Texas story that has some history. He talked about the whole Auburn, the 1983 season and the Cotton Bowl, which, again, if you're a Georgia fan around my age or a little bit older, like I said, you got to be a good bit older than me even to remember the 1958 game. I don't remember it. I've just read about it, and I've seen some clips of Fran Tarkenton playing in that game. It's all. I don't remember it. It's just legend to me. But there are people who are Georgia fans who certainly can remember that. And then before that, there was I said it was 58. There was a game in 57 in Atlanta. So there was sort of a home and away. We played at Austin in 58. They came to Atlanta, and we got beat 26-7. So the first three games against Texas. So getting back to, I guess, Georgia-Texas history. First time we ever played them was in the Orange Bowl in 1949 down in Miami. We get beat 41-28. Then we have a home and away series where we actually played our home version of that in Atlanta in 1958. We went there in 1957, lost 26-7. We lost again in Atlanta, 13-8. And then we don't play them again until that Cotton Bowl that we've already talked about, the 1984 Cotton Bowl. So that's where that goes. And then then you get to the modern era. And so what's the modern era? Well, we played Texas. We talked a little bit about the 2018 team. 2018 team followed up on the 2017 team, which went to the 2018 college football playoff and lost the national championship game on the 2nd and 26 play. The 2018 team goes back to the SEC championship game, loses to Alabama. Alabama goes on to the playoff, and Georgia goes as the top-rated SEC team back to the Sugar Bowl, and we play Texas. And I brought this game up recently as being one of the only games in the Kirby Smart era that I can remember personally. Sorry about that. If I hit the mic there a little bit, if you heard that. One of the only games I can remember of the Kirby Smart era where I think the team played with an emotional response, where the team, and this was a poor emotional response, that basically after making it to the national championship game and then coming up one play short in the 2017 season, they come back in the 2018 season, have another great season, then come up just short in the fourth quarter against Alabama in the SEC championship game, get relegated to the Sugar Bowl instead of to the 4-team playoff, because the 4-team playoff, as I've made this point recently, this week included, was still an elite status, right? I mean, you couldn't just, we weren't giving out the charity of 12 teams in a playoff at this point. So even though we had a great season, and we're clearly one of the couple best teams in the country those years, we get relegated off to the Sugar Bowl. And this was one time where the team kind of just played flat. I mean, Texas came out and got up a couple scores early, and Georgia clearly just looked like they weren't interested in being there. And that's really the only time I think I can say that I've seen that happen since Kirby Smart took over as coach and got things rolling. That the team just, obviously the Sugar Bowl and the letdown of back-to-back seasons of potential championship seasons, just missing out on the national championship the year before, and then just missing out on the SEC champion the next year and getting relegated to the Sugar Bowl, just didn't look like the team cared. They rallied after being down a couple scores, and they got it back to a one-score game, and we lost 28-21. And a lot of you probably remember that game. I mean, certainly a lot of Georgia fans are That's fairly recent history, and a lot of us are old enough to remember that. Even my kids can probably remember watching that game. But a lot of us probably just sort of forget about that game, honestly, because it's pretty forgettable in Georgia history. I mean, the season, what we all remember is sort of the season coming undone in the SEC championship game, where yet again we led against Alabama, and yet again they somehow pull it out and sort of rip our hearts out of our chest, as Larry Munson would say, and they rip our hearts out of our chest and take the game away from us. That's me doing my Larry Munson impression. I miss Larry. I miss Larry all the time. I love hearing the clips of Larry. I love if you get to go when you go to the game, and they have the voiceover of Larry along with the after the lone trumpeter starts. Scott Howard is great, and I love that Scott Howard was in the booth with Larry and then picks up the tradition. And I'm just tickled we have somebody as good as Scott Howard who puts his heart and soul into it and brings the passion and the energy into the broadcast. So yay, kudos to Scott Howard. Josh Brock is doing a great job this year taking over for Eric Zier on the color player commentary side of it. And I really appreciate Josh's enthusiasm, and he's doing a great job. And I'm slow to embrace these changes. I like what we had for so much of my lifetime. It was Larry and Scott, and then Scott and Eric Zier. And Zier and I are basically contemporaries. We're both freshmen the same year, so I feel a lot of connection. To Zier, and I'm glad to hear him from time to time when he has time to be a part of the broadcast. But Josh Brock is doing a good job, so congratulations to him. So now we're really wandering all over the place, and we barely talked about the Texas game, which is the point of this broadcast, is to break down, talk about what's going to happen in this game, and get ready for the showdown on Saturday. So, but we're covering our history, right? So what we're getting to the point where we're saying, look, there's been 7 games. This is going to be the 8th game. And so we lost the first 3 back in 1949 Orange Bowl, the home and away in 1957 and 1958. Then we win that historic Cotton Bowl, and that kind of caps off that run in the 1980s. Georgia will continue to be a good team for the rest of the 1980s, including where I just miss out on the Vince Dooley era, right? He retires in 1988. We go 9-3, beat Michigan in the it's the Gator Bowl, I think, that year. So, and then I come in 1989, and then we go 6-6, and I've talked about that a lot, how the mediocrity starts. So I've been watching all of this, greatness in the 80s, but the peak 80s and peak Georgia 1980s football kind of ends at that 1983 season and winning the Cotton Bowl and finishing number 4 in the country. Georgia would continue to be a top 25 team the rest of the 1980s, but we really don't come that close to being a national champion or SEC champion again during that time. And then, as you know, honestly, we don't win another SEC championship until the 2002 season, and we don't win another national championship until the 2021 season. So, anyway, so that's the 84 Cotton Bowl. And then sadly, we lose the only Kirby Smart disinterested team I ever saw play. We lose that Sugar Bowl in 2019 Sugar Bowl at the end of the 2018 season. So we go from 84 to 2019 before we play Texas again. And then we go from 2019 to last year. And it was the first time we played Texas, and first time we played Texas in the regular season since that 1958 game. So we played in Austin 1958. We come back in 2004, and we go to Austin for the first time. And what do? We win, right? Now, that game was on its way to a beatdown, and you know what happened, and you know the controversy with all the throwing the stuff on the field and all that. In the end, Georgia makes a huge statement, comes into Texas, beats Texas. First time we've ever beaten Texas in Austin, obviously. And at this point, this is only the second win ever against Texas. So, and if you've listened to me and you've heard me talk about it, again, this history buff part of me comes in where the strange collision of history and football and Georgia fandom comes together. And I want it all. I want to win on the field today, and I want to win everything we're entitled to in history as well. So one of the things I hate is to see, I like our dominance in history to be reflected. So I hate looking at any series history where we're behind. I made this point before, like Alabama, we are way behind. We are never going to, in my lifetime, I think, catch up to Alabama. They're like 20 games over plus whatever it was. We talked about it back during the Alabama week. So they got a huge lead on us in the all-time series. And LSU still has a lead in the all-time series on Georgia. But every other SEC team, we have a lead or a commanding lead on in the all-time series history. And many other teams, there's very few teams in history of any kind where Georgia has played them, even Notre Dame. Like, we've only played Notre Dame 4 times, but we have a 3-1 record all time against one of the top 10 programs in the history of college football, Notre Dame, right? We haven't played Ohio State that much, but we beat them in the 1993 Citrus Bowl when Kirk Herbstreit was a quarterback. We beat them 21-14, and then we beat them, of course, famously in the semifinal in the 2022 season. So we have a winning record against Ohio State. So because again, we haven't played these a lot. So I also am not going to get too hung up on, we have a winning record in a series that's only 2 or 3 or 4 games old. But this Texas series has now grown a lot. Again, we'd only played 4 times from 49 to 1984, and now we're going to play our 4th game since 2019. So all of a sudden, of course, they're in the conference now, so we're going to play them. And look, Texas coming in the conference is a big deal. I think it's a little early to call them a huge rival. We've talked about what is a rival. I'm still reticent to say Alabama. I mean, Alabama is a rival historically for Georgia in the conference and in every way possible. But in my lifetime, and for most Georgia fans, anywhere a little bit older than me to a little bit younger than me, it's hard to think of, as I've said many a time, of Alabama as one of our top rivals. We just don't have that kind of hatred for them that we have had, like for Auburn and Florida and Georgia Tech, and even Tennessee building up a lot of recent history because they were able to beat us 9 times in a row. Now, all of a sudden, Alabama has always kind of owned the series with Georgia that was an old historical SEC rival. Then we didn't play very frequently for a long time. We detailed that Alabama week. But of course, now we played them a bunch of times in the last 10 years, and most of that is postseason. Most of that's SEC championship game and national championship game. So and that's changing our perspective. Definitely, the Alabama game is becoming something of a big-time rival for us. But the way the scheduling is going to work out, we're still not playing them every year. So right now, pretty decent chance we'll run into Alabama in the SEC championship game if we make the game. And, I'm sure that a lot of people, both in the SEC and nationally, are probably sick of the Georgia-Alabama SEC championship game. And again, in the history of the conference, that's the conference, right? Who are those 2 best teams in the history of Southeastern Conference football? Alabama and Georgia. So it's sort of fitting that they consistently are meeting each other these days in the game. So, but now Texas is stepping up. Texas, 2nd year in the league. They came in their 1st year in the league, and they make the SEC championship game. And of course, we go there and we beat them, and then we meet them in the SEC championship game and we win again. So 2 wins in a row against Texas. So now the series is 4-3 Texas, and we can even the series historically. So again, that's going to appeal to me. I mean, I want to win the game. Again, I want to win the game on the merits of we're going to play a game. I don't care who we play and what we're doing. I want to win it. So if this was Georgia versus Texas and Tiddlywinks, well, then by gosh, we should win. Whatever Tiddlywinks is, by the way. That example you got used all the time when I was a kid, and I really have no idea what Tiddlywinks is. So there's another thing. If one of you knows what Tiddlywinks is and you want to throw a commentary in on that, I will explain Tiddlywinks once you give me the info. Anyway, back to the game. So we can tie the historic, and this series is finally becoming, again, it's hard to get too excited. Even the Notre Dame, as proud as I am to know that, hey, look, we have a 3-1 record all time against one of the greatest teams in college football history in Notre Dame. I'm proud of that. It's hard to get too excited about a series that's only 4 games and 130 plus years of football. I mean, 4 times but this series, the Texas series, is all of a sudden, again, now we're gonna have doubled the series total play. I mean, it had been played 4 times from 1949 to 1984. And now we're going to have played it 4 times between 2019 and this year. And honestly, this third game, this is basically going to be almost the third game with Texas in the last, in basically almost last calendar year. So that's kind of amazing, right? You know, you play them 4 times in history, and now we're going to play them 3 times in essentially 1 year. But that's what's going to happen. And look, this game will be decisive. Unlike last year, this will not be a game that'll be a rematch, because whichever team loses this game, this isn't definitive, but it's pretty definitive. If you just look at the SEC standings, the tiebreakers, and where everything's going to go, whichever team loses this game is going to have a virtually no chance to make the SEC championship game. Texas and Alabama, Texas A&M and Alabama are both undefeated. If they both go undefeated, then they're going to be in the championship game no matter what we do. We can win out and finish 7-1, but we'll be 7-1, and they'll both be undefeated in the conference. And Alabama would have beaten us even if they had taken a loss and it just came down to Alabama, Georgia. They would have to head-to-head. So I brought this up earlier in the week in previous podcasts, the last couple times, podcasts out. The way Georgia gets into the SEC championship game is we pretty much need. It would be better. It's great if Alabama loses. It'd be great if everybody has 1 loss. You have 4 teams and 1 loss, and then we'll sort it out. But the more direct route would be that we beat Texas, and then Texas turns around and beats Texas A&M. And if that happens, and if Ole Miss wins out and they beat Florida and Mississippi State to close out their season, and they'll be favored in those games, then Ole Miss would be 7-1 in the conference. We'd be 7-1 in the conference, and Texas A&M would be 7-1 in the conference. And none of us would have played. We would have beaten Ole Miss, but neither Ole Miss or Georgia would have played Texas A&M. And so the tiebreaker you're probably going to end up with is cumulative record of conference opponents, right? So what is the conference record of the 8 teams that we played in the SEC to get to the 7-1 record, and what is the cumulative record of Ole Miss and that? And when you add that up, Georgia will have played Alabama, will have played Ole Miss, and will have played Texas. So Texas A&M, as great a season they're having, the teams they played this year in the SEC, I'm not even sure. I think I might have seen they don't even add up to a winning record, a conference record right now. So, and some of that they've been hurt. Like they had the big game, they went to LSU while LSU was still a ranked team. They beat the snot out of them. LSU is, or maybe even LSU wasn't ranked anymore. But either way, they went to LSU, beat the snot out of LSU. LSU then lost to Alabama. So LSU is not contributing to their wins. They did beat Missouri. Missouri is a winning team, but they're not playing as many of the elite teams. Texas A&M, they're not playing us. They're not playing Ole Miss. So they're just not going to end up with, A&M is not going to end up with as good a cumulative record amongst their SEC teams as Georgia will. So Georgia would likely be at least one of the 2 teams in that scenario to advance into the SEC championship game. So if Alabama goes undefeated, we end up in the 3-way tie with Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Georgia. It likely would be Georgia that would move on in that scenario into the SEC championship game yet again against Alabama. So anyway, that's the situation. So and that's the situation coming in the game. While we're there, let's talk about that. You know, I'm not advocating losing, and I know I mentioned this. Let me clear this up too. In the last podcast, I said, maybe we're better off being the 5 seed where we are right now, where you get a home playoff game in December against the lowest ranked team to make the playoff, or in this case, it'd be the group of 5 team. There isn't a group of 5 team in the top 12. There isn't a group of 5 team even in the top 20. So you have to go all the way down to USF, which I think is in the bottom of the top 25. And so we would have, if the playoff was today, based on this week's rankings, we would be hosting a home playoff game against USF. And we'd probably be favored by 10 to 17 points in that game. I think I heard somebody say that some prognosticator on potential lines with some knowledge of Vegas systems or whatever said Georgia would be like a 17-point favorite, 17.5-point favorite in that game. That sounds about right. So that would be a good scenario, right? Georgia would have, and we said, look, we don't know definitively what it meant from last year that all of the seeded teams, the top 4 seeded teams, which Georgia was one of, they all lost They all had the bye, and all the bye teams lost. The teams that beat them were all the teams that had the home playoff games, all the home first round playoff game teams, all the home teams from the first round playoff games won their games, advanced to the teams that were to the quarterfinal games against the 4 seeded teams that had the bye, and those teams that won their first round games and didn't have the bye all beat the teams that did have the bye, and then they all advanced again. So it at least seems from a very limited data sample that playing the home playoff game against a lesser team and building some momentum, getting back in the swing of things, because Georgia played the SEC championship game, won it, but then had a month off to kind of wait and get ready. And the teams that played the week before look in front of their home crowd against lesser competition in some cases. Ohio State maybe not as much, but some of them for sure. Penn State got to beat SMU at home, so we would have sort of that equivalent this year. We would get to play South Florida at home, and we would feel pretty good about that. And certainly we'd get back in the vein of playing a football game and get the team back after a couple weeks off. And then we would move on against one of those seeded teams. And I think that's a good position. If that's what happens, I'm not going to be upset about it. I just want to be clear. I'm not rooting for that. I will never root for Georgia to not win an SEC championship. Even though I intimated that maybe that's a question we should think about. Mostly I was just kind of getting to the point of saying, look, I'm not going to be disappointed that much. We did win the SEC championship last year. If we don't win it this year, it's going to be because we don't even get into the game, I think. I'm not saying we'll definitely beat Alabama if we get there. I'd actually like to see that. I think this would be a great chance to, again, right that wrong. When we had the last time we had a chance where we played, we lost to Auburn. We were the number 1 team in the country in 2017, lost to Auburn. And, then came back a couple weeks later and beat them convincingly in the SEC championship game. I'd love to have another crack at Alabama. I'm not saying we definitely beat them. I know we had them, but as I've said over and over again, we had them. We had them at home. Yes, they took it to us in the first half, but we held them scoreless in the second half, and 3 times we had the ball at midfield with a chance to tie or take the lead, and we just failed to do it. So that's just a lack of execution. So doesn't mean that'll flow that way again. This time it'll be in the neutral game at the Georgia Dome. Alabama has fared better than us playing us in the Georgia Dome, unfortunately. So it's not a gimme like, oh, it's the home game. But I'm good with that. I'd love to have that chance, and I'll be fine if we win the SEC championship, go to the SEC championship game, win it, get one of those spies. I'll take our chances with that. Again, I'm never going to turn down a chance to win an SEC championship. I'm never going to turn down an SEC championship. If we don't get there, because we lost that game early in the season, and I think this team has progressed since then I'm not going to lament it that much, because we do have still the opportunity to get in the playoff, and we'd have a very favorable seeding. So here we go. 8th game all time against Texas. It's starting to be enough that the series matters. That's a point I was making. So I'll wrap that point up and say, so this is a big one for me from a history point of view. This is our chance to tie the series. If we lose it, it means it's going to take 2 wins in a row to get a chance to tie it again, because now they'll have 5 wins and we'll have 3. So now we'll have to play Texas 2 more times, win twice in a row, just to get back to tied again. That's the sort of, again, the zero-sum nature of these series and how they work. That was the way the Auburn series was for a long time, where we were back and forth and we were closely tied. I watched in agony a couple times as we just got back to tied when Auburn was leading that series as a younger fan, and then we would lose and we'd fall again 2 games back. It's like, now we got to win 2 in a row. Well, little did I know we'd win like 20 of the next whatever at some point and just take command of the Auburn series. But that's what's happened, and this is a good chance to be doing that with the Texas series. There's no better way to welcome Texas to the conference than to just keep beating them and have one of the traditional best teams, the second best all-time team in SEC football history needs to continue welcoming Texas to the conference by continually reminding them that you don't just step in to the SEC and think you're going to win it. So Texas has more to lose, because if Texas loses this game, Georgia already is basically a 80-90, showing right now at an 80-90% chance to make the playoff. And even with a loss, I think Georgia's chances will still be in the high 70s or so. I forget what the model is. So, because again, we would have two losses, but we still have a game against a top 25, top 15 Georgia Tech game coming out there. If we win that game, then we would finish the season 10-2. We'd have some nice top 25 wins, and we would clearly be a playoff team. So our chances are still pretty good. Texas already has 2 losses, and they have not fared super well against some of the better teams they played. So if they take a 3rd loss here, doesn't mean they won't make it. Texas would still have a decent opportunity because they, like us, also have another tough game to play. Georgia and Texas have, of the contenders for the playoff, of teams in the top 10 in the playoff rankings right now, Georgia and Texas have probably the hardest remaining schedules in that they both have elite ranked teams on their schedule, top 15, a pair of top 15 teams. They have each other, and then they have their end of the season rivalries, in-state rivalries, and those are going to be top 15 matchups. In Texas' case, it's a top 5 matchup. So Texas A&M being ranked number 3 right now. So Texas can play. Look, Texas was just outside. They were 11th in the playoff rankings last week. They're up to 10 now. 10's the safe spot. You need to be at 10 because one conference champion or group of 5 champion. So in this case, the ACC champion and the group of 5 champion, even if they're not ranked in the top 12, are going to leap over the 11th and 12th seeded teams and get the playoff spot. So 10 is the safe spot, and Texas is in the 10th spot right now. So Texas is in the playoff if it started today. And they can lose this game possibly, but beat A&M and maybe still make that playoff. But that's less guaranteed. They would be much better off to win this game. If they lose this game, they have to be the first team to make an at-large with a 3-loss. There has been a 3-loss team in the playoff. Last year, Clemson made the playoff as a 3-loss team, but they had won the ACC championship, and that's why they leapt from outside the top 12 into the playoff because they won the SEC or the ACC championship game. They surprised everybody, made it to the game against SMU, and then beat SMU, and so they got into the playoff. So they were a 3-loss team, but they were a conference champion. So we haven't had an at-large team make it yet. So Texas would still have a chance, but their chances would definitely be hurt. And part of the way their chances be hurt is if they can't beat Georgia. A&M, in some people's minds, even stronger this year. They're currently undefeated, and so they're going to have this big matchup against A&M, and all the marbles for them on their season for playoff hopes would be on beating A&M. And their chances for that would not look good. If they do beat A&M, even if they lose to us, then their chances are going to jump back up. So that's kind of the stakes. But for us, I don't want to take any steps back. So I'm not saying, we can lose this game and happily make the playoff. I'm not advocating that, just like I'm not advocating not winning the SEC. Certainly want to win this game. And I want to win this game. I don't know if I want to win it more than I want to win them all. I never want to give away any games. I mean, look, we've had our questions about this team all throughout the season, but they do seem to be, I don't want to, again, overmake too much out of the State game, which was one of our most complete, if not our most complete game of the season. You might say the Kentucky game was, but State is probably a better team this year than Kentucky, and playing them on the road was seemed to be more of a challenge. They had played other teams like Texas very well, and they were at least had a winning record coming into that game. They have a 500 record now. State does after we beat them, and that was a reasonable, that was a good game. Georgia just played really well on both sides of the ball, other than giving up the opening touchdown drive. And I've said my piece about that. I don't think that fits into this narrative of starting slow. A lot of teams, especially teams that are offensively oriented, are going to score on their first drive on virtually anybody. They're going to bring their best plays, their scripted plays out. They're going to run everything they got in that first drive. State put everything into that. They even took the ball. They won the toss and took the ball. They didn't defer. So, they just executed the way their coaches planned, which is why they're, making strides. That's why they're a better team this year. They're coming up, is because their coaches are showing that they can accomplish something on the field. They're like, we have an offensive identity. We're strong offensively. We're going to stick to that identity. They win the coin toss, like give us the ball first. We're going to make our statement on offense. They did. 14 plays, 75-yard drive. They get the touchdown. They're not going to score another touchdown for a long time. They're going to be behind 38-7 before they score again. So, but that's how well Georgia executed from there. So I don't think it was a slow start. I think Georgia played well, and I think another indicator of how Georgia's played. I talk about how I'm not a gambler and I don't advocate gambling, but I do think that Vegas is remarkably useful as far as what we see and what we know about what they see and what they know tells us a lot about where these games are going, and they're oddly accurate. Okay, I mean, just shockingly so, right? So Georgia has, I think, covered the spread, if I'm right, 4 of the last 5 games. So early in the season, even when we were winning, we were not covering the spread. And that was one of the disappointments. Georgia said, well, Georgia was favored by, 25 points in this game and they won by 10, or they won by 7. That's disappointing. Well, we've been reversing that trend. In 4 of our last 5 games, we've covered the spread. So the spread last week on the road against State was like 7.5. Obviously, we covered that and then some. We won by 20. Again, one of our first blowouts. We've had 2 real blowouts against SEC teams, Kentucky and State. And again, I always define a blowout as any game that's 3 scores or more. So Texas, we come into this game and we've been. Basically, it opened as a 6.5 point favorite to talk about where we are in Vegas. So the predictive and computer models, the ESPN FPI prediction and simulations show Georgia is about a 60-40 chance to win this game, 60% chance to win the game. We opened as about a 6.5 point favorite, and we mostly stayed there. I think we fell down to about 5.5 point favorite yesterday, and then as of today, bounced back up to a 6.5 point favorite. So we're kind of holding as a 1 point favorite in the game. And the last 2 games against Florida and Mississippi State, those were also close to 1 score games. They were the lines on those kind of hovered between 7.5 and 9.5. I think it got up to 9.5 at one point against State. It was around 7.5 against Florida. So the line is similar here, 6.5 right now. Seems like within a point, but the percentages are a little different. Texas has, by the computers, has a little more chance to win, about a 20% higher chance to win than Florida or Mississippi State did, because Texas, those were both, the computers gave us basically an 80-20 chance of winning those games, whereas the computers are showing, the simulations show us at a 60-40 chance in this game. So, again, let's talk a little bit about Texas real quick, who they are and what's going on. We talked about history, but where is Texas right now? You know that Steve Sarkisian is the coach of Texas. He has been the coach now for... this is his 5th season with Texas. So his first season, he was kind of riding the ship. They were in and out of the top 25, but they finished 5-7. In 2022, they go 8-5 and they lose in the Alamo Bowl. But they did finish 25th. So they made the top 25. I don't know if that's where we had another Texas is back moment because they finished in the top 25, but they had been as high as 18 in the AP poll at one point. And then in 2023, that's when things really kick off, right? Early in the season, they go to Alabama and they beat Alabama at Alabama. And hey, we got to give them credit. That's something we have not been able to do, right? So they end up having a 12-2 season. They were still in, we knew they were coming to the SEC, but they're still in the, what do you call it? They're still in the whatever the heck, Big 12 conference at that point. But they already know they're coming to the SEC, so it's a lame duck season in the Big 12. They get as high as number 3 in the AP poll. They finished number 3 in the AP poll, and they actually in that 2023 season they just miss out on the playoff, and they end up going to the Sugar Bowl and losing the Sugar Bowl. So then in 2024. I'm sorry. They did make the playoff. I'm looking at it. I just saw the Sugar Bowl, but no, the Sugar Bowl was, they go to the Sugar Bowl and they lose the Sugar Bowl to Washington, who would go on to play Michigan. No, Washington, Ohio State. What is it? No. Oh yeah, no, Ohio State. Yeah, Michigan. So basically they go to the Sugar Bowl. They lose to Washington. The Washington team coached then by Kalen DeBoer. They lose that game, a 1-score game. Washington go on to play Michigan in the championship game, and Michigan beats them pretty handily and wins the national championship. So Texas made the playoff. They were one of the 4 teams. They make the playoff. They finished number 3 in the AP poll, and they had a good season. They're 12-2, but they make the playoff and they lose. So Sarkisian gets them. Now his first season he's 5-7. Next season they go 8-5. Third season 2023 they go 12-2 and they make the playoff, but they lose. Then last year they come back and of course what happened. We already talked about how they played Georgia twice. First year in the SEC, they made the SEC championship, but lost to Georgia both times. But they still make it. They actually had the position we were talking about having potentially, if we're outside the SEC championship, they get to host a home playoff game against one of the weaker teams. And in this case, they hosted Clemson. They beat Clemson at home. And then they advance to the quarterfinals against Arizona State. And they beat Arizona State in a game they were lucky to win. Probably Arizona State should have beat them, but they win the score, a one-score game, 38-31, and then they go on to play Ohio State, and they play Ohio State tough. And in the Cotton Bowl, they play Ohio State. They're in a home environment, everything's going great, but they end up losing by 2 scores to Ohio State. But that game is close or tied in the third or fourth quarter. I don't remember the exact details, and I honestly didn't get to watch it. I was overseas I told you in the last podcast I was going to tell you a funny story about that. I'll just throw it in here. We'll come back to this another time. But I was traveling overseas with my family, and we had made great plans. We were counting on watching the quarterfinal matchup, the Sugar Bowl with Notre Dame, and we had great plans. It was going to time out just perfectly that we were going to be in London for New Year's a day, and we had looked up that London, there is if you did not know this is impressive, there is a London Bulldogs fan club. And there is a tavern in London that's an American sports tavern. They kind of fashion themselves a little bit of a Philly style thing. I mean, they serve Philly cheesesteaks, and they play Monday Night Football. They play American Sunday football, and they play the different football games, but they are also the home watching place. I forgot the name of the tavern. I'll look it up and tell you in another podcast. But they are the home watching place of the London Bulldog fan club. It's an official fan group. I think there's a different name to it. I can't think of what it's called. But anyway, so we had made plans that we were going to go to this pub at 2 o'clock in the morning, local time, to watch, because we were going to have the late game there. So we were going to watch the Sugar Bowl with Georgia fans in London. And that was going to be super fun. So we're going to go to a London version of an American sports bar, basically a Northeastern sports bar style is the style they were emulating. And it was going to be in London, and we were going to watch the game. But because of the tragedy that happened in New Orleans, the game got pushed back, and our travel plans were to be elsewhere. In fact, actually, we were in Wrexham. We're also soccer fans, my family, and so we are fans also of the Wrexham TV show. And so we were taking advantage of the opportunity to go out to Wrexham, and we went to the pub there at Wrexham. If you watch Welcome to Wrexham, we met a bunch of the people that you see on TV, and we had a great time in Wrexham. We just missed the team. They had played earlier that week or a day or two before, but we just missed them. And I'll tell you other stories when I do a bigger story about that. But we were in a hotel in Wrexham, and we watched the Sugar Bowl on my laptop computer in a hotel in Wrexham, because the TV was nothing to brag on, and we couldn't get a signal on the TV, but I could get a signal on the internet on my computer. And so we watched the Sugar Bowl, the disappointing Sugar Bowl, sitting on beds in our hotel room in Wrexham. But we had a much greater plan, and it was going to be awesome. We were going to be watching the game with Bulldog fans from the London Bulldog Fan Club in London in an American-style sports bar, and I'm really disappointed that didn't happen. That would have been the treat of a lifetime. So, that being said, I don't really remember exactly what happened with Texas. I just read about it, but I didn't see it. I didn't even see any highlights. We were traveling and doing European things, so I had to back off football a little bit, other than my plan to carve out for Georgia football. So I really didn't get a great sense of last year's playoff outside of Georgia. But I know that Texas, basically Arizona State had Texas dead to rights. Texas comes off the mat, wins the game, advances against Ohio State, actually probably gives Ohio State its best game of the playoff. You could argue maybe Notre Dame did. That's kind of a toss-up. Really, Ohio State built a big lead against Notre Dame, and then Notre Dame kind of closed it down, and you had the whole onside kick. Oh, it's one score. And then Ohio State puts it back to a 2-score game. But I think Texas was more of a legitimate threat in the third and fourth quarter of their game against Ohio State. So anyway, that's a little bit about what Texas has done in recent times. So they've elevated. Sarkisian has come in, and Sarkisian had been a coach at Washington, University of Washington, and USC. Both of those stints were just okay, and he had some personal problems, and he has come back from those and resurrected his career as offensive coordinator at Alabama. He was not offensive coordinator. Kirby, he came in just after Kirby left to take over at Georgia. So they didn't coach together at Alabama, although Kirby says they are friends and know each other pretty well. And so now he's in his fifth season at Texas, and he's 45-19, a 703 record at Texas, and he has gotten them into the playoffs the last two seasons. So he is basically accomplishing the mission, and he has definitely elevated the recruiting rankings. And so Texas and Georgia are now building a little bit of rival. This will be the fourth game, like I said, since 2019, third game in one calendar year. And Georgia and Texas are going head to head more often in recruits. We probably lost more recruits actually this season than I can remember losing to anybody recently to Texas. I know Justice Terry, I think, was the big defensive line recruit that was kind of a last minute. We thought he was locked in at Georgia, and then he flips and he goes to Texas, and possibly money was a big deal there. They maybe were able to throw more money at him. Not that we don't have money, but Texas has an incredible amount of money. And so Texas is a very talented team. You know, I've talked about how if you look at the 247 talent index, we're number one in the country over the last some odd years of our talent. Texas is number 4. So we know that. And they, like us, they've had a very similar season this year where they're not playing quite as dominant and great as they did in that 2023 and 2024 season. Obviously, they've actually were bounced all the way out of the top 25 this season, as you well know, having lost twice, once at Ohio State to open the season and then to Florida. And of course, Florida's not a very good team. And of course, there's been a lot of internet scuttlebutt. Also, I don't know where the word scuttlebutt comes from. I guess it's a naval thing or sounds like a pirate word, right? But there is a lot of scuttlebutt out there on the internet about the fact that Billy Napier came to practice this week at Georgia. And so there's all this buzz like, oh, Billy Napier beat Texas. He's got the secret. He came to tell Kirby how to beat Texas. I think that's a little silly. I mean, I'm sure he gave Kirby some insight and shared with him things they were able to do. I don't think there's any secret that Billy Napier had or that we needed to get him to come in and tell us, or we wouldn't have been able to coach against or beat Texas. I actually heard on Brandon Adams, the Dawg Nation podcast. I was listening to that when I was working out. And again, I do recommend, even though that sort of directly competes, I don't think we compete. I know we do compete for your time and your ears. I mean, if he does an hour-long podcast, I do an hour and a half long podcast every day or every couple days a week, then obviously it's going to be hard for you guys to listen to all those things. But there's not, in my world, one of the reasons I jumped in and doing this is there's just not enough great Bulldog content, and I just want to talk and think and be involved in Bulldog conversations more than I am, and I felt like a need, and that's one of the reasons I jumped out and started doing this. Is like, hey, we could use more thoughtful, insightful, historical, interesting Georgia commentary and thinking, and so that's why I want to do this. But I don't mind lauding the people that I think are doing a great job. And I think of all the other podcasts and things that are out there that are doing great. And of course, they're backed by Cox Media or the AJC. Dawg Nation is a wholly owned entity of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But Brandon Adams, so they definitely have they're different than me, right? I'm an independent guy out here, and they're backed by a large media corporation. And but I think he does a great job. He's a great fan. He's a great Bulldog fan. I like what he's doing, and I have not always listened to him a ton, but I've been listening to him more and more actually as I've been doing this podcast, because again, I want to reflect the conversations that are going out there, and I want to recommend to you what you can hear and listen. And I think this was at the 38-minute of yesterday's podcast with Brandon Adams. But anyway, Terrence Edwards was on, great Georgia wide receiver, and he made the point, Brandon Adams asked him, he said, what do you think about all this about, is there some validity to the idea that Billy Napier has come to help? Kirby asked him to come in to help him, since he beat Florida. And Terrence Edwards made a great point. I think this really made sense to me, made sense to Brandon Adams too when he heard it. And I think that this I'm going to just sort of repeat or paraphrase the idea. He basically said, look, Terrence Edwards, he said, I think that there's more likely if Billy is passing on any knowledge, it's probably more about Georgia than it is about Texas. There's probably nothing that Billy Napier could tell the Georgia coaching staff that they can't see looking at tape and what Florida did and everything about who Texas is. I think we know who Texas is, and the coaches can figure that out from film and break that down. What Napier could do, and this would excite me too, because this would go hand in hand with something I've been talking about during the season. What Billy Napier could probably do is share with Kirby and the staff how another head coach preparing to play Georgia. Now, Billy Napier didn't end up getting to coach against Georgia, but I'm sure he was thinking about it, and he's coached against Georgia before. So he could offer some insight, is what Terrence Edwards said, about how Georgia appears to teams that are preparing for Georgia, to play Georgia. Texas has had the off week, the extra week to prepare. Florida had the off week. Again, Billy Napier got fired right in that off week, but he was getting ready to run that off week and expected to be coaching against Georgia. And he could tell us a lot about, hey, as a competing head coach, getting ready to coach against Georgia with an off week to prepare, here's what I see, here's what I was looking at. And again, that would excite me, because I've told you, if I think we're falling into any weakness at all, as much as I believe in our coaching staff, and I think they're doing a great job in terms of player development. I think Bobo, for all his criticism, is actually calling some really nice plays lately, and he's really been able to build offensively on what we did earlier in the season to what we're doing now. And like I was talking about in the last podcast, he's taken where we did so many screen passes earlier, and now he's got teams focused on dangerous players like Zachariah Branch potentially getting the screen pass, and then he's layering in players on that side of the field where he has a low-high option. People are cheating down to get to Zachariah Branch, leaves the middle option or maybe the deep option open. London Humphreys, 30-something yard catch last week against Mississippi State. If you go watch that play, it was a great example of that. Zachariah Branch flashes out to the flat. It looks like the same screen pass Georgia's been throwing a million times. Two defenders drop down towards him. All of a sudden, there's a big opening just beyond the line of scrimmage, and for 10 or 15 yards, London Humphreys wheel routes out into that area, and Gunner hits him while everybody's looking at Branch. Downfield, you had another deep option. I don't remember who was down there, but somebody was further downfield, and they're blocking for London once he gets the ball. And so it's a great concept and a great setup. And Bobo's doing a nice job of building on that. And I think we've criticized Bobo a lot, or a lot of people have. I don't think I've been super critical, but a lot of people have some consternation over Bobo, and I think it's worth noting he's really called some nice plays. I mean, good offense last week, 560 yards. Second and we've had over 500 yards of offense and over 40 points on the board in two of our last three games. So, I think we definitely see the offense coming around and doing some great things, and Bobo's got to get some credit for that, as much as so do the players, but so does Bobo. So what can Billy Napier tell us then? Well, Billy Napier, though, I've been saying, look, one of the things I'm a little concerned about, and I think one of the things that had been hurting us, my theory about these slow starts, as everybody's calling them, is that teams have an advantage of that Georgia. Some teams change week to week, right? Some teams come up with a game plan and they try to be deceptive, and they're like, we're going to come out and we're going to go against our tendency. We're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to surprise them. Georgia doesn't do that. Kirby Smart is confident in his players. He has good reason to be, even though we're not as powerful as we were in the 2021 and 2022 seasons. Like we've been saying, we're still probably the number one most talented team in the country, certainly among the top five. He's confident in the way they develop players, and good reason. Look how many guys are in the pros. If you saw the picture this week of all the guys from the Green Bay-Philadelphia game, like a whole gaggle of Georgia former players all together after the game taking a picture. I mean, again, just demonstrates where Georgia is these last 10 years. Look at all these guys in the pros, right? And then, but with all this attrition, we've got a lot of young guys who've had to step up, and we're starting to see that as this season's gone on. I think the defense has shown that it's playing better. I think the offense is definitely playing better. It's gotten stronger. It's gotten more dynamic. The offensive line has gotten healthier, and they've also gotten better. These guys have just played, and you hear it from coaches all the time. Look, we're about to play. We're 8-1 on the season. So that's 9 games. We're about to play our 10th game of the season. These guys have played, 8, 9 games. A lot of these freshmen and or first-time starter offensive linemen. Same thing, Gunnar Stockton. Gunnar Stockton looked a lot like a first-time starter, even against Austin P and Marshall early in the game, right? Just not as confident. And again, we ran a lot of screen passes, a lot of short passes, get him moving comfortable. Well, now we see a Gunnar Stockton who's gone on the road against Tennessee and thrown the fourth down pass to win the game, and who's led, a team from behind. We've seen him play against Alabama and get his team in position to have a chance to win that game. We've seen him go on the road and play well against Florida in the neutral site game, go on the road against Mississippi State. He's had big moments now. And against Ole Miss at home, he has right now he's not really in the top of the Heisman discussion, but if he was, people would look back at that second half against Ole Miss where he goes 12 of 12 for 135 yards and 3 touchdowns, say that's a Heisman moment, right? So that's more than just, he's played well, he's been a serviceable quarterback. I mean, you come in against a top 10 team. Ole Miss is still in the top 7, 8 in the country right now, right? Depending on which poll you're looking at. So he goes out against a top 8 team and he plays a 12 of 12, 3 touchdown, 135 yard second half and wins the game. I mean, this is not just a serviceable guy. He's doing a great job now, right? So, but is that who he was at the beginning of the season? No, he's grown into that role. And so it's a credit to Kirby and his staff that these guys can grow. And we're seeing some new guys step up on defense. Sometimes, some because I had to. Unfortunately, we lost Jordan Hall, we've been waiting for him to emerge, and he's finally having a healthy enough season to really be a difference maker that he was thought to be when he was recruited. And unfortunately now he's back to being injured. But Christian Miller has been anchoring the line. We're seeing our linebackers, C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson, step up. C.J. Allen's now leading the conference and a lot of key stats. So, we're seeing these guys emerge. And I talked about that early in the season. If Georgia was going to reach its goals, guys that we're not familiar with yet, or we don't have the experience and trusting like we did from the 2021, 22, and 23 teams, we're going to step up and deliver. And that's starting to happen now. So anyway, that's where Texas is right now. That's what we're talking about. We're saying Texas is under Steve Sarkisian. This is his 5th year. He's elevated the program to the place where they are a perennial playoff contender. They've been in the playoff the last 2 years in a row, and they're in a position to potentially make the playoff this year. It's a down year, like us. They were hyped. They still were a top-ranked team. In fact, they came in as the number 1 team, and Arch Manning famously had too much hype. And look, everybody has said everything about this, so I don't have to say a lot, but I'll just put my 2 cents in and say, look, Arch Manning was overhyped to start the season, not because he didn't have the talent and the possibility, but just like Gunnar, he hadn't been a starter. He hadn't regularly been doing that, and almost nobody, no matter how talented they are, steps in their first year as a starter in the SEC on a potential playoff national championship caliber team and just like, hey, I got this. Boom, boom. Justin Sayin at Ohio State. Nick Saban famously commented on game day this year that, he was the idiot who had the guy playing with the scout team. Who's the coach who had the idiot playing with the scout? Who's the idiot who had Justin Sayin playing with the scout team, referencing himself when Sayin was spent a year on the team at Alabama. But Sayin transfers to Ohio State. Ohio State offense has been getting better and better as the season goes. And you see highlights now. I haven't watched a lot of their games, but you see highlights and Justin Sainz just ripping confident passes downfield over the middle early in the season, like against Texas. They win this game. Didn't even have 300 yards of offense. I mean, they won the game 14-7 against Texas. So teams are evolving, and these top teams, these top talented teams, are rising back to the place. Yes, Indiana's in there, but you look at the top 5 of college football right now, and you've got Ohio State, you got Alabama, and you got Georgia still in that top 5. And that's where it's been the last 5 years, right? So as much as everybody wants to see all the change and talks about NIL and the portal and the Vandy story or even the Indiana story, the top 5 is still at the moment comprised. 3 of the top 5 teams are still teams who've been the teams over the last 8 years. But they're not the same teams they were. Even though Ohio State's dominating its schedule is really weak. And I'm going to talk about that more soon. We're going to get back to what happened this week in the playoff. I don't think it was worthy of sidestepping all the stuff we need to talk about Texas to go back after the rankings. I put my podcast out last before the rankings came out. The rankings came out, let me just say as a side note, really very little changed. As expected, BYU bounced down because they lost. Texas Tech, I was a little surprised to see jumped up against Ole Miss. I've done some work on that, and that's probably more legit. A lot of commentators, especially SEC-focused commentators, Georgia-focused commentators, are looking at Texas A&M having a great game and Indiana barely winning and not seeing A&M jump over Indiana. And they're looking at the Texas Tech jumping over Ole Miss when Ole Miss went out and won. It had been against the Citadel. They had their easy game this week. We have ours against Charlotte next week. They go out and post a 49-0 win against Citadel. Texas Tech beats BYU in a top 10 matchup. They leap over Ole Miss. Should that be, is the strength of schedule for the SEC getting enough credit? These are legitimate questions. I've done some work on that. We're going to come back and talk about that separately. Let me just say, I don't think it's as bad as you might think. I think it's more of a close call when you really look at all the metrics. I see what some of the people, especially Georgia and SEC fans, are saying, and I don't disagree with it. I'm not saying they're wrong, but I also don't completely disagree with the thinking that the committee used. There's a justification for it. It's not unjustifiable. So, look, I'm not that worried about it. I think in the end, things are probably going to work out about like they should. There's certainly plenty of spots, again, with the 12-team playoff. Like I've said, you're going to have teams in the playoff that I don't even think are worthy of consideration for the national championship. So I'm not that worried about, where we sit. If we can't make a 12-team field and have a decent position, then we didn't deserve it. There's so much room to earn something in there that, I'm not that worried about that. So I think that I'm going to wrap up this podcast. I thought this has gone a lot longer than I thought, but I was always going to maybe split the final predictions into, like I said, a Saturday morning podcast. I might try and get it out before the end of tonight, Friday night. So maybe it'll come out Friday night, and then you can get to it Saturday morning. But we're going to get deeper in the predictions. But we're already at an hour and 30 something minutes, and I don't want to go much beyond that. There's just not that much time in everybody's life to go deeper. So what we still have left to do is, we've talked about a little bit of history in Georgia and Texas. We've talked about who Sarkisian is. He's the coach, where he's come from. We know he's an offensive-minded coach and what he's done raising Texas a little bit. It gives us some background. Where has Texas been these last few years as a program? Overall, where have they been? I guess the one thing I didn't say I was going to say is, look, Texas's glory days were in the 60s. A lot of us as Georgia fans, maybe we haven't been completely I will say that when you look at the top programs of all time, Texas is right there, maybe higher than Georgia, I hate to say. When you look at things like the all-time record, Texas is 7th all-time in terms of their record. They are 968, 397, and 33 all-time. That's a 704 winning percentage as a program. So Georgia, by contrast, is 12th all-time by record, a 668 winning percent, so just under 70%. And again, famously, we hit our 900th win last week. Well, Texas has been in the 900 win club. They're already at 968, so they're closer to the 1,000 win club now than they are just entering the 900 win club. So Texas all time has 68 more wins than us. And they have 397 losses. We have 433. So they have, 30, what is it? That's 36 less losses than we do. We have 54 ties, by the way. Texas has 33. So a lot of the difference is just we've had a penchant for tying a lot in history. Ties don't exist anymore in college football, so you're not going to see that happen much. But that's a place where this is just who Texas is. Texas has 4 national championships in their history, and so does Georgia. They're kind of even on that record. Texas, when you look at their national championships, though, go back and look at that real quick. So again, like us, they're down around around 18th in the history of college football, with teams claiming all their different championships. Again, Auburn jumped all the way up to 5th since they picked up a bunch of free national championships this year. But Texas's national champions Texas's national championships. Woo, hard to say, right? Those they have 3 of them in the 1960s. So you just go back and you look at the history of Texas football, and that's where they really exploded. You might have heard the name. Dana Bible was sort of a famous coach that got Texas going, although he didn't really get them. He got them the first time maybe they were ever ranked number 1 in the country, just based on, again, it's hard to say. I mean, like, he took over in the 1940s. The AP poll started in 1936. So their first ever AP poll ranking at number 1 came during Dana Bible's time. His record is not as dominant as a few years later, starting in 57 is when Darrell Royal would take over as coach. And in 1961, Texas would be ranked every year, some part of every season, number 1 from 1961, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And they would win the 1963 national championship. They would win the national championship again in 69 and 70. They claimed part of a national championship as well. So that was really their time. That Darrell Royal, and their stadium is named for Darrell Royal. So he had a great run, and that's where Texas really came to dominance. But in their history, again, they're 7th all time in wins and winning percentage. They have 4 national championships. They have 31 conference championships because they had all these Southwestern Conference championships. I think I've told you about that before, or we talked about that a little earlier, and that's kind of a sort of an amazing run. Hard to equal that. But one place that we have them is bowl record. Texas, and again, I think this sort of speaks to, yes, they dominated their conference for many years, but they had a history of getting to a lot of bowl games, but they only just have a barely over 500 record. Georgia has a much better record in bowl games. Both programs have 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Texas has spent 50 weeks all-time ranked number 1, and Georgia is at 54, 55, I think. So again, I talked about that early in the season. I was happy that Texas got knocked out of number 1 this season, because they could have, if they had not lost to Ohio State, even if they had lost to Florida, they would have, if they stayed number 1 between those 2 games, they would have overtaken us for most weeks at number 1 in that particular little tidbit of a thing. We have 54 and they have 50, so we're 9th in that category all time, and they're 10th. But very arguably, when you add up all of Texas's accomplishments, they come in somewhere in the 7th to 10th all time range. Georgia comes in kind of like in the 7th to 12th time. So very close in programs and program history. And, that just gives you a little bit of perspective. The whole Texas is back thing. Obviously, Texas won a national championship under Mack Brown in 2005, and they had quite a run during the Mack Brown era. I mean, he also elevated the program. They played and lost. You might not remember. Oh, I said they won the national championship in that famous Rose Bowl, Vince Young, 2005. What a lot of people might not remember is that they played again in 2009. They were in the BCS championship game against Alabama. Colt McCoy was a quarterback, and they were undefeated. And they played Alabama, and they lost, and Alabama won the national championship. So you don't hear a lot about that Texas team, but that was kind of the end. That was Mack Brown's last hurrah. They were 13-1, 13-0 coming into that game. They lost the championship game, and I think Colt McCoy got hurt in that game. And so, not saying Alabama didn't deserve the 2009 national championship, but that was Nick Saban's first national championship at Alabama, the run of 6 that he would go on. Mark Ingram was on that team, and but they did go on. They did beat Texas, and they did claim the national championship. Texas was in that game, and then so that was sort of, Mack Brown had a nice long run, and that was his last sort of hurrah. They would be ranked as high as number 5th the next year, but they would actually finish 5-7. Then they go 8-5. He had another 9-4 season, and then going 8-5. And then finally it was time to move on, it felt like, for Mac Brown. They brought in Charlie Strong. That didn't help. He had just a series of 3 losing seasons. Not terrible, 6-7, 5-7, 5-7. Then Tom Herman era. Also, Tom Herman got back into the top 25, and they had a 10-win season, but didn't really advance the cause to championship level. And then that's when Sarkisian came along. So that's a little bit more about the history of Texas and how it compares to Georgia. We've talked about, Sarkisian and where he is right now and what he's brought to the table, where Texas is this last couple of years and relative to the SEC. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered some history, and we've sort of introduced this game. So we're going to come back later, either tonight or first thing in the morning, with another podcast, and we will finish breaking down the specifics of the matchup with Texas and Georgia. I haven't actually cooked up what I think my final prediction and score is. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I like the fact that Vegas sees us as a favorite. I think we are playing well. It's always feels a little dangerous to me when I feel like, hey, we're coming on and we're playing well. Like I said, we've covered the spread in 4 of our last 5 games. The offense has cranked it up. We really haven't had as much of that problem with the slow starts. When you really look at it, the Florida game was a back and forth affair, not a slow start. The Ole Miss game, same thing, was a back and forth affair. I wouldn't call it a slow start. Just 2 teams going at each other till our defense finally figured out how to get more stops than them and close that game out. And then Mississippi State was the first time it looked like we kind of put it all together. Texas has been shakier of late. Yes, they've actually won 4 in a row, but that 4 in a row has been a little bit shaky. They've given up over 400 yards of offense. I mean, their defense has kind of led the way most of the season while they've been waiting on their offense to come together. Their run game has not really materialized. They're dominant defensively against the run, but their run game is averaging less than 4 yards a carry. It's down around just over 100 yards a game. But the last couple games, their last 5 games, their rushing totals for the game. So they've gone 4-1 in the last 5 games. That includes the loss to Florida, and then 4 wins in a row since then. But their rushing totals, going back to the Florida game, have been 152 against Florida, then 136 against Oklahoma, where they won big, 47 against Kentucky, 72 against Mississippi State, and then just 100 yards against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt and Mississippi State both put up over 30 points on their defense and over 400 yards of offense. Their offense, you'll hear a lot of people say, hey, Manning's starting to round out. He's had 300 yards. He's had back-to-back 300-yard games and 3 touchdowns. And that is a big mark, and that's great. And their offense has that. In fact, their offense has come up with exactly 428 yards a game in each of their last 2 games. And they have scored 45 and 34 points in those last 2 games. So the offense does look like it's come together. But that has come at the expense of the defense completely falling apart, because the defense has also given up 38 and 31 points in those games and given up actually more yardage in those games than they've gained. They've been outgained in those last 2 games. And so you're not hearing a lot of people say that when they talk about, oh, Arch has come alive. He's had these big games. The offense is finally clicking. Offense is finally clicking. Defense is kind of falling apart. And so we'll talk about that more in the next podcast. What does that mean? What are we going to see? What are the matchups? I feel pretty good, though. Our offense has also been coming alive. 2 500-yard games in our last 3. Lots of points, lots of production. We've seen Bowens have big games running. We've seen Frazier have a huge game running. The offensive line really looks like it's come together. Juan Gaston is playing regularly and just throwing some monster blocks. The guys who've been playing have been doing a good job. Ernest Green's been healthy. We finally got a nice rotation there. We're seeing a lot of guys emerge on offense to be offensive playmakers, and we're seeing defensive players step up around Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, and Christian Miller, who've been the anchor of the defense up front. We're starting to see some other guys make some plays. So we're going to break that down. We'll talk about it some more. Thanks for being with me again. Feel free to please share, please recommend the podcast to other Dawg fans, other sports fans, other college football fans. I think there's a lot here for them to appreciate. Please make comments, join, again, take advantage of, if you can, go to, like I said, at the Substack. You can you can make comments, or there's buttons there to reply, either send direct messages or put comments, or to share this podcast, or even join a chat. And I do have a chat working on Substack. And don't forget, we do the chat during the games. So I'll be doing the chat during for Saturday night's game. So feel free to step in and join any and all Bulldog fans who show up for a chat. I'll be hosting that, and I'll be happy to have you guys come along and join in on Substack. It's free to everybody. Membership is free right now, so just join in. So thank you so much. I hope you have a great Friday, and we'll be back later today or first thing tomorrow morning with the rest of the breakdown and predictions for the Texas game. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm feeling good about most things. It's great to be a Georgia Bulldog. So, let's just have a great Friday afternoon. Look forward to a awesome day at Sanford Stadium. Awesome night game. I look forward to seeing how that's going to look. I am sure the fans, the university, and everybody is going to do a bang-up job, just like they did most recently in their last night game that we had. So that was against Alabama, and it was in a losing effort. But I think this time things may come out a little differently. So there's a hint on my thinking. So till later, go Dogs.